From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. And welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, David Gornoski. So glad to be with you once again here in our neighborhood, here across Central Florida. We're happy to be with you. And you can always remember to catch us live Monday through Friday, every weekday from 4 to 6 on WHBO and 1040 a.m. in Tampa, and then across Central Florida on 540 a.m., 93.1 FM in Orlando, and 94.1 FM in Sanford. And then across the world, you can catch us on our YouTube live stream, our Facebook live stream, and stay abreast of all the news that we're breaking on this show, where we bring the real thinkers. Look, I was just thinking of this the other day. When you get most news talk programs, you're going to get 90% fluff and blame games about what governors or what someone says, and then 10% substance stuff, deep dive, truth that has something to do with your real life today. Well, we do it the opposite. All of our stuff is 90% the real deep dive information that helps our families. So joining me tonight is our friend, our medical doctor, someone who we've had on the program before. You can find him all over YouTube, social media, because his stuff is catching on like a wildfire. Medical doctor, Dr. Ken Berry. How you doing?
Hey, great to be with you again. I'm doing well.
Well, it's great to hear from you because, you know, our program, we've talked several times, and I'm a big, passionate believer, and let food be thy medicine, you know, as Hippocrates said. And I think that the best food for human beings is primarily animal-based foods. And you are a big advocate. You've taught me a lot, and I like keeping up with your work over the years. But now more than ever, Dr. Berry, we need to get this message across every single day to everyone who can listen about the importance of food and how it shapes our health and our immune system.
Absolutely correct.
Well, I want to dive in with you a little bit. First of all, I've got a little thing I want to pick your mind about. What is it about all you guys who advocate for meat? I'm talking about Dr. Sean Baker, Dr. Paul Saladino, Dr. Berry. Every one of you guys has carbohydrates in your last name. You've got berries,
yeah, I know,
you've got
right?
baking,
What's up with that?
You've got salads. I mean, is that some kind of cruel trick by God or what? What's going on with all this?
Yeah, I'm not sure what that's all about. But one other thing that we all had in common is we used to be metabolically quite ill. I was morbidly obese. I think Dr. Baker was obese, if not morbidly obese, and Dr. Saladino had multiple medical issues he was dealing with. And it was only when we rediscovered the proper human diet, which is either mostly fatty meat or all fatty meat, that's when all of our seeming medical problems went away. And it's kind of magical if you just see it from the outside. But then when you start really digging into it, there's a lot of science behind this. Human beings are, by definition, low-carbohydrate mammals who love salt and should eat lots of salt. And so that's what all three of us, and indeed everyone else in this community, that's the diet that we have readopted once we rediscovered it. And our morbid obesity went away, our skin conditions went away, our joint problems, our gut problems, all that stuff just seems to subside. It's like your body calms down and remembers what it feels like to be healthy again.
Yeah, it's very good, and it's something that, you know, I think in my own life I've seen a huge improvement in my life when I've adopted ketogenic eating, starting back in 2004. And then, take breaks or, back then it was a lot more lonelier in the space of keto because everybody was telling me, David, if you eat 20 carbs a day and primarily meat, you're going to hurt your kidneys. You got to get off this diet. And so I'd get off of it and I would gain weight or not feel good and feel sick. And so I've always gone back to keto. And then in the last 2 years, I've been experimenting more and more with eating animal foods only. And I have found it to be even better than the keto way of living, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want people to understand there's not there's not magic in meat, in fatty meat, in eggs, in butter, in bacon. There's no magic there. What you're doing is when you eat bacon and eggs for breakfast, that's not a magic meal. But what you didn't eat was the toast and the jam and the pancakes and the waffles and the hash browns, and you didn't drink the orange juice or the Coke. So what you're really doing is you're subtracting these insulin spiking, inflammatory inducing foods, or pseudo foods is what I call them. You're just not eating that. And so what you're really doing is returning to an ancestrally appropriate human diet. The human body, if it's fed properly, is by definition healthy and strong and lean and amazing. But when you start to poison it with the slow poisons of sugars and grains, even whole grains, it doesn't have to be processed honey buns. It can be whole grain waffles. That spikes your blood sugar, spikes your insulin. It causes inflammation in all the arteries of your body. And those things cumulatively lead to disease.
But what about all the superstars like kale and goji berries and nani juice or quinoa? What about all those? I mean, those are great for you, right?
Right. And I used to be a firm believer in the magical phytonutrients that were in these plants. But the problem is if you were just to make a PowerPoint slide and put the nutrition contained in a serving of fatty ribeye versus the nutrition in kale, you'd be blown away, because we're all brainwashed into believing that kale is a superfood. Noni juice, goji berries, this root from the Himalayas or this herb from the jungles of South America, when in reality, that's just the latest marketing ploy to sell you a capsule or a drink or some kind of mix or powder. None of that stuff's true. The true nutrient-dense superfoods come from animals. That is the most nutrient-dense food you can eat on this planet. And I saw a visual that had a serving of beef liver beside a serving of kale, and the liver blows kale away in every single category. And so, yeah, we're all taught that, but none of that's true.
Yeah, I've seen in a same, if you get like 100 grams of grapefruit, fresh grapefruit, compared to 100 grams of beef liver, you've got more vitamin C in that same serving of grapefruit compared to, you got more vitamin C in the liver than you do in a grapefruit. And that's shocking for me. I'm living the Sunshine State. I've worked in citrus, and when I saw that, my mouth was dropped. I said, my goodness, you're telling me that's the case?
Yeah, and most people consider grapefruits to be a low-carbohydrate food. And so a lot of people will eat a medium or a large grapefruit for breakfast. That's anywhere from 15 to 30 grams of carbohydrates you've started your day off with. And although grapefruit doesn't taste sweet, the sour and the bitter disguise the sweet taste, but they're full of sugar. All citrus is. And I lived in Florida for a year in the Tampa area, and I used to sneak over the back fence in people's yards and steal their oranges and grapefruits because I was broke as a joke. And I thought I was really getting a superfood there. And other than the vitamin C, there's really no nutrition to speak of in any citrus food. I could have eaten 100 grams of liver and gotten everything that was in the grapefruit, all the good stuff, but then hundreds of other vitamins and minerals that the grapefruit is devoid of. And I could have avoided all those unnecessary insulin-spiking carbohydrates.
Well, what about old Popeye? Popeye told us to eat a can of spinach every day. Was he lying too?
Well, Popeye was a sailor. And so sailors, they're good at judging the wind and tying knots, but they're not really that great when it comes to human nutrition. Plus, he was a cartoon. Plus, I think they had spinach commercials on the earlier versions of the cartoon. Thus, Popeye loves spinach. And I think that's a great example of how the big food, multi-million-dollar corporations will use a cartoon or a cartoon commercial. Think of Tony the Tiger. Think of the little elves on the Rice Krispies. And they then trick children into believing, and this belief can carry on through into your adult life. How many people still believe that Cheerios are a superfood, that they're full of vitamins and minerals? How many people believe that spinach is somehow full of these magic muscle-making nutrients, when in fact it's completely untrue.
Let's hold this thought. We're speaking with Dr. Ken Berry, taking on Tony the Tiger and more in just a moment, live on A Neighbor's Choice. Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. We're live across coast to coast Florida, the Sunshine State. Don't listen to the television. You got to get out and get fresh air. Don't go into a mosh pit. I don't know what the mosh pit industry is doing right now or what they're going to do in this foreseeable future, given the social distancing mantra and how that's playing out. But make sure that you don't stay sequestered in home, eating potato chips, getting no sunshine, getting no fresh air, getting no warm air, humid air. That's good. If you can get it, get it. You know, I don't know about you guys listening to us from far in the hinterlands of the north, where that wall where they do Game of Thrones and all that with the dragons. I don't know what you guys do, but for those who have a little bit of warm weather, get out and get some fresh air, get some, humid air if you're in Florida or nearby in that area, and just enjoy the breath of freedom that we have still in our nostrils every day. Joining me is Dr. Ken Berry. He's with us, and we're talking about the importance of nutrition as the foundation to medicine. He's a medical doctor. You can visit his website, kendberrymd.com. He's the author of Lies My Doctor Told Me, and as a doctor, he's fighting back against those lies. Dr. Berry, I wanted to kind of pick up where we left off. There's a lot of misinformation out there about where we get our vitamins and our nutrients. And to this day, as someone who now knows that animal meat and organs and fish and eggs, especially when you get these things fresh and cooked properly, not overcooked and things, some of the best stuff you can get for all the essential vitamins that you need to thrive. And they're more bioavailable because it just makes sense. If we're animals and you've got animal food, right, that operating software is going to work better, right? It's like Mac versus PC. If you're taking plants, that's Mac. You don't put that into a PC software if you're a mammal, right? So you're going to want to eat mammals primarily to have the like effect, in my opinion, of the effectiveness of nutrition when you eat, your vitamins.
Absolutely, and this is actually what the proper human diet is. Actually, isn't up for scientific debate. If we look at the paleoanthropological research, it's blatantly obvious that the reason that we evolved into the apex species on this planet, the apex predator, if you will, is because we ate as much fatty meat as we could get our hands on. We would eat veg if we had to, if we were starving, or if we just wanted some berries if they were ripe, or we wanted to put a little spice on our meat, we would do that. But overall, we ate as much fatty meat as we could stuff into our gullets on a daily basis for hundreds of thousands of years. And we can tell this from the carbon and nitrogen and strontium stable isotope analysis that we can do on a human bone, whether that bone's 100 years old or 100,000 years old. We can tell from the enamel in the teeth and the collagen left in the bone what that human ate for the majority of their time. And without exception, before 12 to 15,000 years ago, which is when we started thinking that agriculture was a smart idea, we ate as much fatty meat as we could hold. And that's what human beings do best on. Now, I personally am a carnivore. I eat almost 100% animal meat and eggs and animal products as my diet. And I'm actually slimmer now and more muscular now than when I was in my early 30s, and I'm 51 years old. I don't work out for hours a day. I don't do any of that stuff. I just eat the proper human diet. But if you watch television or listen to radio or read magazines, you're going to see all these advertisements for what, if you didn't know better, you would think, well, Cheetos, that's part of the proper human diet. Pepsi, that's part of the proper human diet. it wouldn't be legal for them to advertise it if it weren't good for me, right? Problem is, no, that's not right. As long as their product doesn't kill you quickly, then they don't have to worry about a lawsuit. They make a huge profit on the GMO grains that all this stuff is made with, or the high fructose corn syrup that comes from the millions of acres of monocropped corn that's grown in the Mideast or Midwest. Those things are not part of the proper human diet, but they are part of a very profitable big food business.
Interesting. So, that's the thing that I think we don't understand is we've got this, people are always advocating for a single-payer medical system to change all the problems. But I think we've had single-payer nutrition with the USDA. We've had the food pyramid. That's single-payer nutrition science where the government has a monopoly and they fund the universities and they hand out grants to their buddies and they subsidize who they want to subsidize, and those guys get the peer-reviewed paper purchase in academia, and it's a good old boy network. And we've had single-payer nutrition, and it tells us to eat 7 to 11 servings of grains a day, and that is simply false. That's pseudoscience. That's fake news, and so I don't understand why we want to go to single-payer medical care to fix what single-payer nutrition broke. It's only going to get worse.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a bad idea, but I would actually like to focus more on let's just eat the proper human diet, because then regardless of what healthcare system we have, it's going to matter less and less because fewer and fewer of us are going to be sick. Fewer of us will have heart attacks and strokes and eczema and psoriasis and acne and irritable bowel disease and arthritis pain. We just won't have these maladies because we're not chronically poisoning and inflaming our human body.
Right. That's the key, is that we've got to get to the foundation of medicine, and that is, in my opinion, what you're doing with your body and your lifestyle. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about is that a lot of people say, well, I think, and this is my opinion, I think that sometimes the focus on obesity as the hallmark for health can be a distraction. It is a critical key, but there's a lot of folks that say, well, I can point to all these people who are fit and trim for decades, and they eat tons and tons of grains and all this stuff. So, if they're fit and trim, they're not doing anything wrong. So how do we unpack that confusion?
Well, that's a very commonly believed myth, and a lot of people will point to India or Asia and say these people live on carbohydrates, but they're thin, and that's where there's a term we call TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. And if you actually look at the medical numbers for India and Asia, they have sky-high rates of prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, and fatty liver disease, even though they are thin. And you'll see this very commonly in an Indian or an Asian man. He'll be very slender, but he'll have that little belly. And that fat, that visceral fat, that liver fat, that pancreatic fat, that's the fat that's going to actually harm this person. So you can, and so it's much more common on average for people who have DNA that comes from the high northern latitudes. And so some people call these Caucasians. We're much more likely to get outwardly obese than people from the Middle East or India or that part of the world. But that doesn't mean that just because they're thin on the outside and fat on the inside, that doesn't make them metabolically healthy. And indeed, if you check their blood sugar levels and their hemoglobin A1C and their C-peptide and their liver labs, they have fatty liver. They've got prediabetes. They're metabolically very sick, but you can't tell it just by outward appearance.
So that's fascinating, because a lot of folks, can point to anecdotal, like some folks can eat a whole pizza and stuff every day and do no exercise, and they never gain much weight. They stay pretty skinny, but you're saying they're still sick.
That was me back in my early 20s. I could literally sit down and eat 8 or 10 donuts and drink a pint of skim milk. And, I looked great. I had a six-pack. I was very slender. I actually couldn't put on any muscle back then. I couldn't gain any weight. But that changed in about my mid-30s. And then since then, it's been the opposite fight. And I think that happens for many people. And you'll see these young men and women out in the fitness space who are in their early 20s telling people who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond, who are morbidly obese or who are very metabolically ill, dude, you just got to move more and eat less. And these young people, although I'm sure they mean well, they have no idea what they're talking about. Moving more and eating less, that's been the advice since the 1960s. It has not worked for anybody long term. If anybody listening to this, if you're morbidly obese or overweight or you have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, it's not your fault. You're not a glutton. You're not a sloth. It has nothing to do with the morality judgment that these young fitness gurus will love to heap on you. That's not the problem. The problem is you're eating the wrong food. You're eating a diet that's not fit for a human being.
I think that's a very different angle that most people are not presented with. Most people are told the whole body positivity thing that you hear in politically correct media where it's just, no, you can be 500 pounds and that's beautiful. Just reconfigure our society to think that's the standard. But that's not the right answer. But then you're critiquing the other extreme, which says, oh, if you're obese, it's just because you're a slob. Meanwhile, skinny people are eating pizzas and saying that the obese people are the slobs. So it's kind of this complicated left-right thing that's just not true. We're going to unpack this more with Dr. Ken Berry as we focus in on the importance of immunity in this moment. Let's continue in just a second. Hello, Tampa Bay. This is David Gornoski here. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. We're live, WHBO 1040 AM. Go ahead and set that as your go-to talk station as we navigate these turbulent times for our families. We're also on News Radio Orlando. Across all Central Florida, we cover you. And then we're worldwide on Facebook and YouTube. And we're unpacking and challenging the sacred cows of nutrition and medical science, finding the truth wherever it leads. Here with Dr. Ken Berry. He's the author of Lies My Doctor Told Me, which is a book available online. Get it. It's a good reading book to do when you're going through times where you can't work outside the house. But I wanted to kind of hone in on some of the things that we're unpacking. So, Dr. Berry, I think what you hit on was interesting because a lot of, you were saying that basically there's a lot of misconceptions about obesity, that some genetic predispositions manifest obesity because of the consumption of industrial processed foods, primarily plant-based carbohydrate foods, sugar, seed oils, right?
That's exactly right.
So what does that mean? Does that mean that, let me just this little science nerd stuff here. Does that mean that perhaps those who manifest obesity easier from eating these carbohydrates, they just have a genetic evolution in their history where they were able to store, if they're from northern European climates, for example, if you're going through a long winter where there's not a lot of food to eat, you eat a few berries and you pack on that energy on your body a little bit better than the other guy who'll burn through it real quick. Then the guy who can pack on those berries over the long winter is going to be able to burn that fat and make it through the winter more efficiently. Is that what's going on with people who have this propensity to manifest obesity when they eat carbohydrates?
Yeah, that's exactly it. If you lived in a very northern climate where the winters were very hard, then it was very advantageous for you to gain 5 to 20 pounds of just pure fat in the late fall so that you would have that stored energy to fall back on just in case you couldn't make a kill in the winter, and that way you didn't starve to death. And it's important for everybody to understand that all of your body systems run better when you eat a low-carbohydrate diet. Insulin has hundreds of functions in your body, but one of its main functions, and indeed the function that we focus on the most in this low-carb community, is insulin is a fat storage hormone. Anytime you eat a food that spikes your insulin level, that turns off your ability to burn that fat. And so you can imagine our ancestor we were talking about. In the dead of winter, they haven't eaten in several days. Their insulin level is going to be very, very low normal. Still normal, but low normal. And that's going to allow them to burn that stored energy, which is what fat is, so that they can use that and not starve to death. But when you eat breakfast cereal and skim milk for breakfast, that's going to spike your insulin level, and you're not going to be able to burn any fat, even if you're following a calorie restriction diet or a portion control diet. And that's why so many people fail at Weight Watchers or Jenny Craig or any of this stuff. Even though it's a very low-calorie, low-fat diet, they can't seem to burn the fat that they're trying to get off. And that's because the high-carbohydrate foods that they're told to eat and the high-carb snacks they're told to eat in between each meal keeps their insulin level off the chart high. It's impossible to burn fat when your insulin is chronically high like that. And like I said earlier, it actually affects every system of the human body, including the immune system, which I think everybody might be interested in right now.
Yeah, so just to reiterate on that point, because I think it's a fascinating point that nobody really knows that information. Is there scientific literature that has been able to confirm that Northern European hypothesis? And it's not just Northern Europeans. I mean, look at Native American cultures. You know, they've had issues with obesity rates skyrocketing when they eat, processed foods and things like that, the carbohydrates. So, I mean, has there been literature to kind of back up that genetic?
It looks like the genetics from the northern latitudes are much more able to handle carbohydrates metabolically, but they get fat. And so someone with that DNA is going to, when they eat the high-carb diet, they might stay inwardly metabolically healthy longer, but they would develop this outward obesity, whereas someone with DNA from near the equator, they're not able to put on that fat, and so they immediately start to hold visceral fat and fat in their liver, which is going to push them very quickly towards type 2 diabetes.
And I think a lot of people would be shocked to hear that, because they have probably thought, well, if there is a genetic component to the propensity to be obese, eating carbohydrates, it's probably a genetic deficiency, some kind of mutation that's a net loss. What you're suggesting is probably actually the better way, metabolically speaking, to survive in our ancestral environment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you are in an environment where, for several months out of the year it's very cold and food is very hard to come by, then it's metabolically advantageous for you to be able to eat lots of berries in the late summer and fall, lots of apples, lots of fruit, lots of veg, and put on a few pounds of fat. That's very, very protective for you during the long, cold winter. And so in areas of the world where that winter never comes, they didn't really need that ability to store fat very easily and quickly like that, and so they never developed it. But then we come back around to all this. A low-carbohydrate diet is the proper diet for both of those individuals now, right, that we don't have to go through these long, cold, hard winters, because we've got grocery stores and we've got indoor plumbing and we've got central heat and air. We're not at the mercy of the elements in Mother Nature anymore. We can control all that, and so therefore the high carbohydrates that we used to eat at the northern latitudes no longer serve a health purpose like they did back then.
Right. That's fascinating, because I think that would really open a whole new paradigm of conversation, that both people who are obese or out of shape in that way and skinny folks are both in really bad shape eating primarily carbohydrates for fuel. It's just that the obese people express the warning symptoms on their body more manifestly than those who are skinny. But they're in the same boat, is what you're saying.
Yeah, they're both metabolically unwell. And I would say for every single human being on the planet, eating more than 50 total grams of carbohydrate per day is not good for human health. It's not good for your metabolic health, but it is very, very good for the economic health of the big food manufacturers.
Right. What do you think about the idea of this word senescence for aging? I've been talking to a doctor and a professor over in Manchester in England who's using antibiotics, particularly azithromycin and doxycycline, to kill off senescent cells. And he's found them to be very effective. And he did a trial that showed in a labs, 97% of senescent cells were killed by Z-Pak alone. And his hypothesis is that the reason why people are dying at such a high rate in their elderly years with this new virus is the proliferation of these aging senescent cells. So my question for you is, has there been any indication that eating in a ketogenic fatty meat diet has an ability to remove those senescent cells from that level?
Well, yeah, and there's two ways to look at this. You can remove the senescent cells once they've already developed, or you can eat a diet that slows down a cell's movement towards senescence, right? And one of the main things eating a high carbohydrate diet does is it glycates all of the proteins, all the cells in the human body. And many people listening have probably heard of an A1C measure, which is a measure of the amount of glycation of your hemoglobin. And we use that to kind of follow people's diabetes to see if it's getting better or worse. What so many people don't know, and even many doctors don't know, is it's not just your hemoglobin that gets glycated or gummed up by the sugar that comes from the breakdown of any carbohydrate you eat, whether it's a jelly donut or 2 slices of whole grain non-GMO bread. The carbohydrates break down into sugar and they glycate your albumin, your hemoglobin. Every protein in your body gets glycated, and that moves cells towards senescence much more quickly.
Right. I've had Harvard biologist on, David Sinclair, who talks about metformin being something that could be used to remove the senescence. Is that kind of related to the same mechanism? Because that's used for diabetes, but he says he takes it just as a prophylactic for aging.
Yeah, and I've actually looked at that extensively. My whole philosophy centers around let's not take any pills at all if we don't have to.
Right.
And so glucophage or metformin is a fasting mimicking drug, just like the ketogenic way of eating is a fasting mimicking diet. And one of the things that fasting does is it increases your level of autophagy, which is a fancy word, and it basically means that your body looks around for old, worn-out cells, and it kills them, and it breaks them back down into their constituent parts, and then builds new, healthy, vibrant cells. And so nobody knows for sure if metformin or glucophage does that, but it looks like it does. And any low-carbohydrate diet mimics the effects of metformin and glucophage by being, and what all of them are mimicking is fasting or just not eating, because there is no quicker way to ramp up your level of autophagy or basically cell recycling than fasting.
Yeah, and so now some would say, well, fasting, isn't that stressing out the body, though? Isn't that going to create a lot of wear and tear on the body if you're eating a diet that mimics fasting?
Well, that's what everybody thinks. The problem is that human beings have been fasting for our entire existence on this planet. You can just imagine 100,000 years ago, it would be nothing to not be able to find food for 2 days. That'd be a very common occurrence. And so if the human body were as weak and as fragile as our modern-day nutritionists and dietitians lead us to believe, oh, you've got to eat 3 meals a day with a snack in between. If you don't do that, your blood sugar will plummet, your energy levels will plummet. Just imagine if you applied that paradigm to our ancestors 100,000 years ago. So basically, if you didn't kill something within 4 hours, you're done. You would get weak, your blood sugar would drop, your energy levels would drop, and you would just sit there and starve to death. Actually, that's not what happened at all. As the longer we went without eating, the more hours, the more attuned our senses became, the more our body would get rid of old cells and produce new, vibrant, very, very active cells. That's how we were able to live that way. And so for someone, and that's also a very common myth you'll hear in today's nutrition circles, is that fasting very hard on your system. You should never fast. You should never go for more than 4 or 6 hours without eating. And that is a modern paradigm that's, first of all, based on no meaningful research. And secondly, it's not based on our ancestral model at all. It's just made up crap.
So would it be something like if you did a water fast? Would that be like, let's say, an A plus fasting healthy effect versus maybe a carnivore keto diet would be like a B level of fasting effect because you're still eating food and you're still getting some, glucose from liver or something if you're eating that kind of stuff?
I don't know if we have the research to know which style of fasting is best, but
Right.
we just know that any style of fasting is better than not fasting at all. And so many people who are eating a carnivore or a very fatty meat heavy keto diet will just naturally gravitate towards eating 2 meals a day. And so when they do that, they'll eat those 2 meals within a 4 or a 6 hour eating window each day. And so for 18 or 20 hours, they're not eating at all. And that seems to be the sweet spot for human beings when our levels of autophagy increase, our levels of inflammation go down, our fat burning is kind of maximized. That's where people feel their best and look their best, is when they have this 16 to 20 hour fasting window every single day. And that's the model that I follow personally. And at 51 years of age, I'm actually thinner now and have a lower body fat percentage than I did when I was in my early 30s, which that's supposed to be the exact opposite of what happened. But
so you're killing some senescence.
Go ahead.
You're killing some senescent cells there, Dr. Ken Berry. You're doing some anti-aging. Let's continue in just a second on A Neighbor's Choice. Soaring high across Florida and the world around, A Neighbor's Choice continues. I'm David Gornoski, your host, talking about immune system building, talking about obesity, all those things that you hear, all these scary things in the news. And I'm joined by a doctor. We've got a doctor in the house, Dr. Ken Berry. I want you to go to his website, kendberrymd.com, and check out his book, Lies My Doctor Told Me. If you're watching online or if you're a YouTube fan, you can also subscribe to his YouTube channel. Just look up Ken Berry, MD. And Dr. Berry, I wanted to kind of land the plane here. I think this is an exciting time in our history where the truth of nutrition is finally starting to be discovered. And what's so confusing is that folks lack the patience and the discernment to chew the fish and spit out the bones, meaning there are so many folks who've been pushing, I've got the doctor solution, I've got the nutrition solution. It's grapefruit diet. That's what you got to eat. Or it's you eat 5 times and you do this thing and you eat a spoon of this and a spoon of, there's a billion different nutritional guru little things popping up all the time, and it creates such a numbing effect for the truth. But I believe that truth exists. I don't believe in postmodern notions that everything's just subjective. And I think that at some point we're going to find the truth about what the human body was meant to eat. And I think that the work you're doing and other carnivores are doing that cutting edge pursuit of the truth.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And what you'll notice, and your listeners will notice, is when someone has a product to sell, then they're going to talk about that product. And so what I'm talking about here is a proper human way of eating. And so I don't advocate any supplements. I don't advocate any products. You don't need any roots or berries or herbs. All that stuff is fluff for healthcare and nutrition gurus to make $1 million. People should look, and people are probably tired of hearing all of the keto people on their social media saying, oh, my God, I reversed my diabetes. Oh, my gosh, I reversed my obesity. You're probably sick and tired of hearing that, but here's something you need to think about. There is no multi-million-dollar corporation behind keto. This is just people, regular people, salt-of-the-earth people who have rediscovered, oh, man, when I eat this way, all of my physical ailments get better. When I eat this way, I don't have to take as many pills. When I eat this way, I don't have to go to the doctor as often. I'm actually healthier at a foundational level. And the ketogenic diet doesn't add anything. There's no, you've got to take like the exogenous ketones some people try to sell you. That's worthless crap. You don't need any of that. What you're doing is you're removing the slow poisons, the grains, the sugars, the industrial seed oils. You're removing all of the stuff that basically big food tricked you into believing was real food. It's not real food. It is real profit for them, though. But when you remove all of that stuff, what you're left with is a diet that is very rich in fatty meats and organ meats, plus or minus some veg, depending on your genetics. That is the proper human diet.
Right. Now, let me ask you, what would people say? We've got just a little bit of time, but we're going to run through a few more objections. What would people say? They say, okay, all right, maybe there are some toxins, because that's a thing that you've talked about and others, that maybe there's some toxins in plants that we need to avoid because they bind up our minerals and nutrients. But if you take the phytotoxins and plants and stack them up to the antibiotics and grain and all the toxins that industrial meat has, it's about the same difference. So it would be not much of a difference for your health if all you can afford is conventional grain-fed animals. You're not going to get much of a health benefit eating that and cutting out the plants. Basically pick your poison. Phytotoxins naturally occurring in plants, and of course pesticides there, or pesticides, herbicides, antibiotics, and so forth that are in the conventional meat that you eat.
Yeah, I think that's basically a straw man that's been set up mainly by people who own grass-fed, grass-finished farms trying to sell their very expensive meat. The people I'm trying to help are people who, they're having to really cut corners and make ends meet, and they're trying to just make sure they pay the mortgage at the end of the month. There is grass-finished, grass-fed, non-GMO, non-antibiotic meat 5 or 10% better than the cheapest meat you can buy at the grocery? Maybe. Is it worth paying 3 or 4 times the price for it? Absolutely not. And I've actually got a YouTube video in which I say that you can eat hot dogs and mustard and be healthier than if you're eating all the processed stuff. I think the quality of meat does matter a little, but it doesn't matter nearly as much as the people who are trying to sell you the expensive meat pretends that it does. I very, very seldom eat meat that doesn't come from just the regular grocery. I eat grain-finished beef all the time. I think it might make a tiny bit of difference, but it's never worth the increase in price.
So to some, what you're saying is the naturally occurring toxins and anti-nutrients in plants is not anywhere the same level as the conventional grain-fed beef in terms of those are not the same thing. There's a magnitude order higher problem with the natural toxins in plants, right?
Absolutely. And so if you're talking about eating grains, whether that's rice, corn, oats, wheat, any of that, those things are 1 or 2 orders of magnitude more inflammatory and more insulin spiking than just the cheapest hot dogs or bologna or potted meat or sardines that you can get at the grocery. Those cheap meats are orders of magnitude more healthy than a grain-based diet.
Well, as I always say, a ribeye a day keeps the doctor away, but I appreciate your time, Dr. Berry. What you've said is very important, and we need to remember.
It's always a pleasure.
We need to remember to take people's advice who really have skin in the game, who have practices like you, who treat patients in the flesh and blood and see dramatic improvement and understand the literature behind what they're doing. We don't have to eat kibbles and bits called Frosted Flakes. Sorry, Tony, you were just wrong, Tony the Tiger. And Popeye, those were yesterday's news. The future is eating animal-based food. That's the key for our nutrition. I'm going to continue to push that as far as I can, as much as I can, with honest doctors like Dr. Ken Berry. Thanks for joining me, Ken, and check out his book, Lies My Doctor Told Me. A Neighbor's Choice will continue in just a moment. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.